Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our live coverage of the latest mission from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. I'm Will Robinson-Smith. Will be conducting our commentary for the duration of this coverage. We are broadcasting, as we always do, from the Spaceflight Now News Bureau here at NASA's Kennedy Space Center. If you were with us on Sunday or yesterday for the first two launch attempts of this mission, Starlink 6-77, welcome back. If this is your first time seeing SpaceX attempt to launch this mission, welcome in. We hope you're all having a good week as we're nearing in on the weekend. We're just so very close. Weekend Eve, as some of my former colleagues like to call it. Currently T-minus 58 minutes, 23 seconds and counting to the planned launch of this Falcon 9 rocket, which has been at the pad since at least Sunday afternoon, or early Sunday, getting ready to launch 23 additional Starlink V2 mini satellites into low Earth orbit. We'll show you with a little more detail in just a little bit the flight path of this mission, but broadly speaking, it's heading in a southeasterly trajectory. So once it leaves the pad, it will fly southeast away from Florida's Space Coast with a booster landing just off the coast of the Bahamas. This mission sending 23 Starlink V2 mini satellites up to the 6th shell of the Starlink mega constellation. We're joined as always by our Spaceflight Now editor Stephen Young, who's running the technical operations of the broadcast. Our Adam Bernstein is out in the field getting ready to track the rocket and do some still photography as well. Our Michael Kane has this afternoon off from photography duties. If he does pop into the live chat, though, be sure to give him a hello. You'll recognize him by the sort of bluish-purple crowbar indicating moderator status. If you'd like to follow either of the fellows on X, you can find them at their handles here. Adam is at ABurnNYC, and Michael at MD Kane Jr. While you're over there, be sure to follow Spaceflight Now, simply at Spaceflight Now. If you're not on X, you can also find us on Threads as well as Facebook. We're also joined in our tracking work today by our friends Chuck and Jen Briggs with C&J Images, as well as P. Carsons with Max Q Productions. Seeing a little bit of haze here from Chuck and Jen's vantage point, so hence it's a little bit brighter than our view from here at the press site. That said, if you've been with us for the previous launch attempts of this mission, you know that weather has been certainly a watch item for all involved. Fortunately, though, the good folks over at the 45th Weather Squadron have forecast mission outlook that is far better for today's launch opportunity. Taking a look at our wide shot here down at the turn basin, you can see the American flag is blowing. However, liftoff winds were forecast between just 16 and 21 miles per hour. Certainly calmer than it's been in recent days. And the launch weather officers forecast a 90% chance of favorable weather conditions at liftoff. Just tracking some cumulus clouds out in the area, which you can see just by looking around the edges of this live angle here. You can see some of the blue sky trying to break through in the upper left-hand corner, but do have a layer of clouds sort of hanging out and around. Of course, Hurricane Rafael did make landfall down in Cuba this week. So some of the outer impacts of that hurricane as it makes its way north, heading westward across the Gulf of Mexico, according to meteorologists. Forecasters said, and I'll quote them here, the only concern for Thursday's window will be any low-top cumulus clouds that may track directly over the launch complex. If for whatever reason SpaceX is unable to launch today, they do have a backup opportunity tomorrow that has a 95% favorable outlook. As it stands now, SpaceX is targeting the opening of their launch window today, which is 3:13 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. That's 2013 UTC for our friends joining around the world. As we get things rolling, if you haven't already, we'd certainly appreciate it if you could hit that like button for us. Allow some more folks to find their way into our live launch coverage. Realize it's sort of an odd hour for many people. 2:19 here on the East Coast is a little bit late for lunch, too early for quitting time. So certainly appreciate all of you who are able to be here right now. Maybe if you're in Mountain Time, you're hitting us right at the lunching hour. And so we appreciate you popping us up on your laptop or cell phone or desktop computer while you chow down on a sandwich or whatever sustenance you brought your way today. Also want to thank our moderators in the live chat for helping to keep things kosher for folks and allow some good, robust conversation to be had. So tip of the hat to Aussie Space Girl and to Callisto Lee for being with us today. If you do see any of our other mods join us, be sure to give them a hello as they pop in. We do ask that you help make their job a bit easier by A, refraining from using all caps, B, being kind to one another and treating others how you would like to be treated, visiting the live chat, and C, please refrain from overt political conversation. We know we are still very much in the aftermath of the general election here in the United States, and there's still a lot of thoughts about the election, both on the federal and local levels and the state level races, but we are not a politics-driven podcast. There are plenty of other venues for that, and so we ask respectfully that you keep the conversations to most basically everything other than that. And we hope you enjoy your time here. Currently T-minus 51 minutes, 48 seconds and counting. Also powered by a wonderful channel member community here on YouTube. So thanks to folks like Patty Chichil, Sulfur for Lunch, BC Stargazer, Wallace Frey, Chrissy Spirit Wolf, That Opal Guy, and many others. Channel membership comes with a number of perks, including discounts at our online shop. That is shop.spaceflightnow.com. Access to member-only videos here on YouTube, and of course the ability to watch all of our live launch liftoff moments from here at the Cape in 4K. Last bit of housekeeping. If you have a comment or question that you'd like to be read aloud on the show, and your comment or question is appropriate to be read on our broadcast, you can always use the YouTube Super Chat feature. Not only will he be giving us some interesting things to talk about as we continue on through the countdown, but you'll be supporting what we do here at Spaceflight Now, and that is always very much appreciated. Kicking us off on that footing is Wolverine Warlord, one of our wonderful channel members with a $10 Super Chat. Appreciate that, Wolverine, who says this is the launch that should have happened last Sunday when I was on the lawn at KC Visitor Center. That got scrubbed. Now I'm back in Michigan. Sorry, Wolverine. Well, hope you enjoyed your time at the KSC Visitor Complex. Lots of cool things to see and some interesting folks to talk to. So even though your time there was not highlighted by a launch, hope you still had a good time. Also want to thank you for gifting 20 Spaceflight Now memberships. Really appreciate that, Wolverine. Thanks for growing our community here. And to our newest channel members, welcome aboard. I'm glad to have you with us. Be sure to thank Wolverine in the live chat if you haven't already. And we hope you stick around with channel membership. Moving right along, we're T-minus 49 minutes, 54 seconds and counting. SpaceX runs its countdown for this mission and others here in Florida from its Hangar X site. It's a facility where they refurbish Falcon 9 boosters to prepare them for future flights, as is the case with the booster on tap for today, which we'll talk about its history in just a little bit. But in the meantime, let's go ahead and talk about this countdown timeline and the milestones that we are anticipating as SpaceX is preparing once again to launch this Falcon 9 rocket, hopefully in just a little more than 49 minutes. Things get underway nominally at the T-minus 38-minute mark. SpaceX does this poll electronically to give the go-ahead for the start of fueling. So if they are ready to do so earlier, they can take it before the T-minus 38-minute mark, but that's nominally when it happens. Once the go-ahead for fueling is given, that starts at T-minus 35 minutes with the loading of RP1, or rocket-grade kerosene, on board the Falcon 9's first and second stages. At the same time, liquid oxygen starts flowing on board the Falcon 9's first stage. T-minus 30 minutes is when they start loading cryogenic helium onto the pressure vessels on the Falcon 9's first stage. The helium is used to pressurize the main propellant tanks during flight. The same will be true on the second stage about 4 or so minutes after that. T-minus 23 minutes is when second stage RP1 loading concludes. Then at T-minus 20 minutes and 50 seconds is when the strong back chill down process begins. That's when they are thermally conditioning the feed lines prior to the second stage liquid oxygen load. We see that visually with what we call the so-called big vent. It starts at about T-minus 20 minutes and 20 seconds, runs till just about T-minus 16 minutes and 30 seconds. And after that, we see second stage LOX load get underway. Moving on, T-minus 7 minutes is when the chill down of the 9 Merlin engines begins. That process involves flowing a small amount of liquid oxygen through the plumbing and turbo pumps, and it protects the engines from the risk of thermal shock and damage during the startup sequence. 6 minutes before liftoff, the first stage kerosene tank is full. Then at T-minus 4.5 minutes, we'll see the strong back retract sequence get underway. It starts with the clamp arms underneath the payload fairings opening up, and then the transporter erector, or the strong back, will recline about 1.5 degrees away from the Falcon 9 rocket. It stays in that position until liftoff, at which point it pulls back in a much more rapid fashion to clear the way for the vertical climb of the Falcon 9. T-minus 3 minutes is when the first stage LOX tank is full. Same is true on the second stage about a minute or so later. At that point, the Falcon 9 rocket is completely full with 1 million pounds of propellant. When you hear that the Falcon 9 is in startup, that means control of the countdown is handed over from the ground sequencer to the Falcon 9's onboard flight computers, and the propellant tanks are brought up to flight pressure. 45 seconds before launch, the flight director will give their go for launch. The engine ignition sequence is teed off at T-minus 3 seconds, and if all 9 engines are healthy and ignite, the flight computer will give the command for the hold down clamps to release the bird for a T0 takeoff. Coming up at 3:13 p.m. Eastern. It's 2013 UTC. Coming up in T-minus 46 minutes, 12 seconds. As of their most recent flight, here's where SpaceX stands on their missions this year. 106 Falcon flights, including 2 Falcon Heavy rocket launches, 104 Falcon 9s. SpaceX not going to be able to quite reach their goal of 144 Falcon missions on the year, but certainly looking to get back to a ramped up cadence once they get past this launch today. SpaceX's vice president of flight says they're working, or vice president of launch, excuse me, says they're working towards a cadence of lifting off every 2 days on average. Following the launch today from Pad 40, assuming all goes well and we do actually get a launch today. Next up to bat will be Starlink 9-10 mission, a launch of 20 Starlink V2 mini satellites, including 13 featuring direct-to-cell capabilities. That Falcon 9 rocket lifting off from Space Launch Complex 4 East over at Vandenberg Space Force Base. That's coming up Friday night for those locally in California in the overnight hours here on the East Coast. Now T-minus 44 minutes, 36 seconds and counting to this planned launch here. Now a little less than 7 minutes away from the point at which the launch director will need to make the call on the start of fueling today. Now T-minus 43 minutes, 30 seconds and counting. Once again, the Brevard County Emergency Operations Center has activated in support of this mission. One of the busiest EOCs in the country. It activates every time there is a launch attempt or any other launch-geared activities, a hot fire test, for example, ready to respond just in case there is an anomaly that could potentially impact the public. Brevard EOC on standby. Of course, they're not only busy with all the rocket launches and related activities. Of course, we're also situated here in the Florida Peninsula, specifically in Central Florida, and we are no stranger to the impacts of natural disasters like hurricanes, so folks stay busy there this time of year, the EOC. Now T-minus 42 minutes, 24 seconds and counting. As we are awaiting the start of fueling, let's go ahead and talk about where this Falcon is going to be flying once it leaves the pad. Let's talk a little trajectory, shall we? Taking a look at a Google Earth view of the Sunshine State, and once the Falcon 9 rocket leaves its pad, of course talking about Space Launch Complex 40 or Slick 40 there at the Cape, it's going to be flying in a southeasterly trajectory. Following the path of that green line there. The first stage booster, though, is going to be separating and landing on a SpaceX drone ship, and the one on tap today is called Just Read the Instructions. Assuming all goes well with the booster recovery part of this mission, SpaceX will have reached a total of 96 booster landings on Just Read the Instructions and 363 total booster landings. Of course, the first stage booster isn't the only piece of the Falcon 9 architecture that they want to recover with this mission. Those payload fairings also going to be attempted to scoop up out of the Atlantic Ocean. They splash down into the support of parachutes. SpaceX saves about $6 million per recovery effort, so it's an important part of their business model to fish them out of the ocean and bring them on board their recovery vessel, and then bring them back to port and over to Cape Canaveral Space Force Station, where they can be refurbished and turned around for future flights. SpaceX is working to certify both its payload fairings and first stage boosters for up to 40 flights apiece. They don't often publish a lot of information about the number of flights that the fairing halves have flown, but as far as the boosters are concerned, the currently still flying launch leader for SpaceX is B-1067, most recently flown on September 17th, 22 flights in its ledger. The booster that's flying today is B-1085. B-1085 looking for its third flight. So a fairly new entrant into the SpaceX fleet. First flew back on August 20th, supporting the Starlink 10-5 mission. That was followed up by the launch of Crew 9. That Dragon spacecraft, named Freedom, still docked to the International Space Station. Of course, launching under the certainly unique circumstance these days of only sending 2 crew members up to the space station, since it will be used to bring NASA astronauts Butch Wilmore and Sonny Williams back to Earth once it undocks in the February timeframe. Now T-minus 39 minutes and counting. Just about a minute away from the nominal point at which SpaceX will make the call on the start of propellant load today, if they are ready to do so. If SpaceX does not begin fueling, they do have additional T0 opportunities that last until 7:09 p.m. Eastern tonight. SpaceX uses a style of fueling called load and go, essentially, as we talked about with the timeline to count down. They're fueling up to pretty close to the point at which they need to launch the rocket because they use a super cold densified liquid oxygen. And so once fueling has begun, they don't have the ability to hold the count and recycle for another attempt. So if they are not perfectly ready to start fueling, they would punt till later in the window. All indications at this particular juncture suggest that they are still on track for a 3:13 departure time, which means fueling is set to start in less than 3 minutes. What we're looking for in the start of fueling, as a reminder, if you see the lettering that spells out SpaceX near the base of the Falcon 9 first stage booster, just beneath the X in SpaceX, you can see a slightly lighter tinted band just above the tree line there. Right around that spot is where we'll start to see a frost line form and a little bit of vapor as the aforementioned liquid oxygen starts flowing onto the tanks. Of course, it is significantly colder than the warm, humid Florida air here. That's why you'll see a little bit of frost form in that vapor once it does start flowing. We usually start to see some visual indications of that coming up around usually by T-minus 33 minutes is when we start seeing some evidence of that. Hopefully we'll also get some written confirmation from SpaceX, a post to X, suggesting that fueling is actually happening or is about to happen. No word yet from them today. Now currently T-minus 36 minutes and counting. We're now T-minus 34 minutes, 27 seconds and counting. At this point, if SpaceX is still targeting that 3:13 p.m. Eastern launch time, fueling is now underway on the Falcon 9 rocket. And given that we are not seeing signs of fueling yet, we do actually have a new T0 from SpaceX. They are now targeting 3:19 p.m. Eastern, 2019 UTC. We are readjusting our countdown clock. As you see, we are now back to T minus 38 minutes, 12 seconds and counting. An adjustment by that small of a margin suggests that maybe they just needed a few more minutes of preparation time in order to get ready for this mission, or perhaps there was a COLA. Essentially an adjustment made in order to avoid a collision with another orbital body. One of the advantages of having a longer launch window time is that in the event of a COLA, they are able to make some adjustments again, and as long as they have not begun fueling. We're now T minus 34 minutes, 56 seconds and counting. Once again, with this new T0 of 3:19 p.m. Eastern, 2019 UTC, SpaceX at this point should now be fueling the Falcon 9 rocket, assuming that it is in a good posture to do so with that adjustment. And we do have word within the last 10 seconds from SpaceX, and I will quote them here. Falcon 9 is ready, the weather is excellent, and propellant load has begun for today's launch of 23 Starlink satellites from Pad 40 in Florida. So with that confirmation of fueling now underway, should start to see some visual signs of that again near the base of the Falcon 9 rocket, where that frost line should start forming, a little bit of vapor in the area as well. We're now T-minus 31 minutes, 55 seconds and counting. Again, if you're just now joining us, SpaceX is in the process of fueling its Falcon 9 rocket in preparation of launching the Starlink 6-77 mission from Pad 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. At this point, we are starting to see that frost line form, a little bit of vapor at the base of the Falcon 9 rocket just beneath the X in SpaceX that you see written vertically. In about a minute and a half, SpaceX will start loading cryogenic helium onto the pressure vessels of that first stage. The helium will be used to pressurize the main propellant tanks during flight. The same will be true on the Falcon 9's second stage, just a handful of minutes after that. Talking about the payload on board today's Falcon 9 rocket, 23 Starlink satellites getting ready to head up to low Earth orbit. This will be SpaceX's 72nd dedicated Starlink V2 Mini launch of the year. Each of these clocks at about 1,760 pounds, or roughly 800 kilograms. With their solar panels unfurled, they have a wingspan of about 100 feet or 30 meters. They use argon hull thrusters for in-orbit maneuvering. They're built in Redmond, Washington, which is near Seattle, and they'll be deployed at about 180 miles or 291 kilometers in altitude at a 43-degree inclination. Some differences between the V2 Mini Starlinks and the version 1.5s that launched previously. The V2 Minis have 4 times the capacity of their predecessors. They introduced E-band for backhaul to the fleet. They use an upgraded phased array antenna. They're about 2.6 times heavier than the version 1.5 Starlinks, and they use argon hull thrusters as opposed to the previously used krypton thrusters. And thanks to the folks over at HEO and Black Sky, we have this image of a Starlink V2 Mini satellite in its on-orbit configuration, orbiting above our heads, part of the constellation that has now thousands of satellites on orbit. In fact, according to astronomer and expert orbital tracker Jonathan McDowell, prior to the launch of this mission, there were a little more than 6,500 Starlink satellites still remaining on orbit. I believe his most recent update came on November 5th, so just about 6,500, a little bit more than that, still in orbital space. Here's an image of one of the thrusters test firing, those argon hull thrusters that Starlink satellites use for in-orbit maneuvering. Now T-minus 28 minutes, 42 seconds and counting. With less than half an hour to go on this planned mission launch, I want to thank the more than 3,800 of you who are joining with us live today. If you haven't already, we'd certainly appreciate it if you could hit that like button for us. Allow some more folks to find their way into this live coverage as we continue on through the countdown. Also want to thank Patty Chichil, one of our wonderful channel members, for gifting a Spaceflight Now membership. Really appreciate that, Patty. And to our newest channel member, welcome aboard. Glad to have you with us. Be sure to thank Patty in the live chat if you haven't already. Now currently T-minus 25 minutes, 47 seconds and counting. Taking a look at our live chat here, see Becky G checking in from the Kennedy Space Center Visitor Complex. Hopefully you have better luck around this time getting to see a launch liftoff as opposed to, fortunately, Wolverine Warlord, who got skunked seeing a launch from there. So we'll keep our fingers crossed for you. And also for our viewers who are in Central and South Florida, if you do happen to catch a glimpse of this Falcon 9 rocket as it takes flight, you can have a picture or video that you'd like to share, be sure to tag us on X. We'd love to see it. I also want to thank Rusty Shackelford, one of our newest mods, for hopping in with us this afternoon. Good to see you. Also want to thank Donald Smith for joining us with the channel membership at the Pal Leader level. Welcome aboard, Donald. We're glad to have you with us. As we are coming upon the big vent here for second stage LOX load preparations, let's go ahead and talk for a moment about the booster that's supporting at the base of the Falcon 9 rocket. This particular booster, tail number 1085 in the SpaceX fleet. We briefly touched on its flight history, but as a quick review for those who are not with us when we spoke about that, it's fairly new to the SpaceX fleet, having previously launched just twice before. First go around was Starlink 10-5 on August 20th, 2024. That was followed up by Crew 9, the duo, an astronaut and a cosmonaut currently on the International Space Station, supported by this booster here, lifting off on September 28th. Now, for those who are looking at this order, and there were certainly a number of folks who jumped in the conversation on social media to talk about Starlink being the first flight for this booster before going ahead and launching a crew mission. The reason for that is originally this booster was going to launch Crew 9 first. However, during its transport from Texas over to Florida, it did have an issue with some water intrusion. And so, as part of a way to ensure that it would be safe for the Crew 9 mission, NASA and SpaceX came to the agreement that it would first launch on the Starlink 10-5 mission, and that way both parties could get more data about the fix to this booster before it was entrusted to launch humans. Obviously, the most precious cargo that any spaceship or booster could launch. We're now T-minus 21 minutes, 21 seconds and counting. Just a hair less than a minute away from the point at which we'll start to see the so-called big vent. The visual indication from the chill down of the feed lines prior to second stage liquid oxygen load. That process begins in 10 seconds. But we'll see it as the big vent, T-minus 20 minutes and 20 seconds. And right on cue, we see the start of the so-called big vent there at the strong back. This process will last until about T-minus 16 minutes and 30 seconds. 30 seconds after that is when second stage lock zone will begin. Now T-minus 17 minutes, 14 seconds and counting. About 40 seconds left on this big vent right here. Taking a look at our live chat, want to thank one of our channel members, Chuck Close, for a very generous $25 super chat. Really appreciate that, Chuck. Good to see you this afternoon. And as we're starting to see the tapering off of the big vent again, liquid oxygen load on the second stage now about to begin. This is the last step in fueling the Falcon 9 rocket that had not previously started, which is about to get underway. With that now in work, let's go ahead and take a moment to talk about the launch timeline. This is the sequence of events that we're anticipating following a normal flight path for this Falcon 9 rocket. Following a liftoff at 3:19 p.m. Eastern, 2019 UTC, the rocket will pass through max Q, with a point of greatest aerodynamic pressure on the vehicle, about a minute 10 seconds into its flight. That'll be followed by a few events in fairly rapid succession. We'll see first stage main engine cutoff, or MECO, at about T plus 2 minutes and 25 seconds. That'll be followed by stage separation a few seconds after that. Then the upper stage engine, the Merlin vacuum engine, will ignite to begin its burn. The payload fairings will be jettisoned just before the 3-minute mark. A few minutes later, the first stage entry burn begins, lasting about 24 seconds in total. That'll set up the landing burn, coming up at T plus 7 minutes and 43 seconds, with an expected touchdown on the drone ship. Just read the instructions at T plus 8 minutes and 11 seconds. That'll be followed shortly thereafter by the conclusion of the first burn on the second stage, after which the upper stage of the Falcon 9 will go into a coast phase until T plus 54 minutes on the dot. There will be a brief 2-second burn. That'll set up the Starlink satellites to be deployed at T plus 1 hour, 5 minutes, and 8 seconds. Again, there are 23 Starlink satellites on board this particular Falcon 9 rocket, lifting off in 14 minutes and 14 seconds. See a lot of folks talking about where they're going to be watching the launch from. Some over in Titusville, just across the river. Good vantage point. Peter Hayward checking in from the UK. Not quite as close, but certainly that's why we do these live launch broadcasts. So no matter how far away around the world you may physically be, you can always be right here with us visually when it comes to seeing this Falcon fly. Also see James Uko joining from Kenya. And then just a little bit south here in Brevard County, Kimberly, one of our channel members, checking in from the Ugali area of Melbourne. Checking in from the Arts District. Now T minus 13 minutes, 5 seconds and counting. As we're getting close to the final 10 minutes of the count, now T minus 12 minutes and 44 seconds, I want to thank the more than 9,400 of you who are joining with us live today. If you haven't already, we'd certainly appreciate it if you could hit that like button for us. It allows the YouTube algorithm to do its thing and bring some more folks into this live launch coverage, and that is greatly appreciated. Also want to thank Savius of Texas joining us with a $10 super chat. Really appreciate that. And one of our wonderful channel members, Valerie Jones, marking 11 months with us as a channel member. Glad to see you sticking with us, Valerie, who says 11 months of fantastic spaceflight coverage. Thanks to Will and the whole team. Well, thank you, Valerie, for the kind words. And thanks for your ongoing support of this coverage. Now, T minus 11 minutes, 48 seconds and counting. The next milestone that we're looking at, of course, is the chill down of the 9 Merlin engines at the base of the Falcon 9 rocket. That involves flowing a small amount of liquid oxygen through the plumbing and turbo pumps to protect them from the risk of thermal shock and damage during the startup sequence. And with some time before liftoff, let's go ahead and talk about the rocket in question. Falcon 9 standing 70 meters or 229 feet tall. It has a diameter of 3.66 meters or 12 feet. The majority of that is made up by the Falcon 9's first stage. Bottom 2/3 of this rocket. This is B-1085. It has launched twice before, going for flight number 3 today. Perhaps coincidentally, this being the third time that SpaceX is attempting to launch this rocket, having to push back to today for a variety of reasons, but I digress. At the base of the Falcon 9's first stage are 9 Merlin engines, which burn a rocket-grade kerosene and liquid oxygen, producing 1.7 million pounds of thrust. Around the engine compartment are black carbon fiber landing legs that will be used to land the first stage on the drone ship. Again, SpaceX today is using the drone ship called Just Read the Instructions. Above the first stage is the inner stage. This is a composite structure consisting of an aluminum honeycomb core which is surrounded by carbon fiber. In the image on the right-hand side of your screen, you can see the deployable hypersonic grid fins. These are titanium winglets that provide stability and steering for the Falcon 9 rocket as it comes back through the atmosphere, tail first, like a big old dart towards the drone ship. At the top of the inner stage are 3 mechanical latches that attach to the Falcon 9's second stage. At first stage, main engine cutoff, high-pressure helium is used to release those latches, and 4 pneumatic pushers ensure a clean separation. Also, the second stage engine nozzle is housed safely inside the inner stage adapter until stage separation. Speaking of that second stage, the upper stage of the Falcon 9 rocket is powered by a single modified Merlin engine called a Merlin vacuum engine, or an MVAC engine. It's equipped with a large nozzle which is optimized for burns in the vacuum of space, hence the name. It produces more than 220,500 pounds of thrust, and it will be fired twice on today's flight, placing the 23 Starlink V2 mini satellites into their intended orbit. As with the first stage, so goes the second stage, powered by LOX as well as RP-1. Following Starlink satellite deployment, it will ignite for a third time for a deorbit burn, helping to drive the upper stage back into the atmosphere where it burns up, helping to eliminate the risk of creating any unnecessary space debris on this mission. Finally, at the top of the stack are the payload fairings, encapsulating the 23 Starlink satellites, the payload for today's Starlink 6-77 mission. Fairings are made up of a carbon composite material, and they stand 13.1 meters or 43 feet tall, and are 5.2 meters or 17.1 feet in diameter. The two halves of the payload fairing will splash down in the waters of the Atlantic Ocean following their separation, and they'll be recovered by one of SpaceX's recovery vessels, brought back to Port Canaveral, part of Cape Canaveral, brought up to Cape Canaveral Space Force Station, where they will be refurbished and turned around for future flights. Again, SpaceX working to certify both the payload fairings as well as the first stage boosters for up to 40 flights apiece. Now T-minus 8 minutes and counting. Now T-minus 6 minutes, 37 seconds and counting. We talked about this a little bit earlier, but obviously there were far fewer folks joining in at that point. So if you are just stepping in with us, welcome aboard to Spaceflight Now's live coverage of the Starlink 6-77 mission, currently in progress. I'm Will Robinson-Smith, reporter with Spaceflight Now. We are currently T-minus 6 minutes, 10 seconds to liftoff. And for those who were not with us at the top of the broadcast, let's go ahead and briefly touch back on the trajectory for this mission, where this Falcon 9 is going to fly once it leaves this pad, Space Launch Complex 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. Falcon 9 is going to be flying in a southeasterly trajectory once it does leave the pad, flying along the arc you see here in lime green. Following stage separation, the Falcon 9 first stage booster will separate and landing near the Caribbean. On the drone ship, just read the instructions. The payload fairings will be jettisoned and splashed down in the waters of the Atlantic Ocean under the support of parachutes, and they will be brought aboard a recovery vessel, like the one you see here in this picture from last summer, brought back as well as the booster into Port Canaveral, turned over for refurbishment, and prepared for a future flight. We're now T-minus 5 minutes, 6 seconds and counting. At this point, we're getting ready to get our first pad level views of the Falcon 9 rocket, get some mission audio piped in for you. SpaceX is preparing for the strong back retract sequence. Now T-minus 4 minutes, 14 seconds and counting. Again, those additional noises you're hearing are just the pad level sounds. You can see the clamp arms beneath the payload fairings have opened up. You should see the transporter director starting to move a little bit away from the Falcon 9 rocket. As a bit of housekeeping, you'll notice the countdown clock in the upper right-hand corner of the screen, a little bit different than what you're seeing in the big box. Reason for that is our clock is in real time. What's coming in through the SpaceX feed is on a slight delay. So given that the majority of our cameras that we'll be using for the ascent part of the mission are with us here on the ground, we'll be making our call-outs in real time up to the point which we're relying on the SpaceX onboard cameras exclusively. We're now T-minus 3 minutes, 10 seconds and counting. We're awaiting the point at which SpaceX concludes liquid oxygen load on the Falcon 9's first stage. Should be hearing a call out for that shortly.
Stage 1 LOX load is complete.
Good call there from SpaceX. In about another minute, we should hear a similar call for the second stage. As we are awaiting the conclusion of fueling, want to thank just a few more folks for your support. Our thanks to Tim Scheidler for gifting 5 Spaceflight Now memberships. Really appreciate that, Tim. Thanks to the Peasant Knight and Aaron Jarvis for gifting a couple of super chats here. Really appreciate that from the two of you. Our thanks to Dr. Ed Kelly joining us to channel membership at the pad leader level.
Stage 2 LOX load is complete.
And with that call, the Falcon 9 is now fully loaded with 1 million pounds of propellant. And what you're seeing here are the ground gas closeouts as they are clearing any remaining liquid oxygen from the feed lines. The strong back.
Ground gas closeouts.
There's that call that you just heard, referencing what I was just talking about. Want to quickly thank Patty Chichil for a $5 super chat, who says, thank you, Spaceflight Now and mods. Always great coverage and learning so much. Thank you, Patty. And with that, we are now just a minute away from flight, so we're going to keep our eyes firmly affixed to the rocket, and we'll return to any additional comments or super chats after launch.
Falcon 9 is in startup.
Good call from SpaceX. We are just awaiting the launch director to give their go for launch now. We'll be ready to move ahead.
Go for launch.
And with that, SpaceX is now just about 20 seconds away from launching its Falcon 9 rocket. 15 seconds. And here we go. In 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Engine ignition and liftoff of the Falcon 9 rocket on the Starlink 6-77 mission. The Falcon 9 has cleared the tower.
Chamber pressures are normal. Power and telemetry nominal. Vehicle is supersonic. Max Q.
And a good flight of the Falcon 9 rocket so far, as you just heard, passing through max Q, point of greatest aerodynamic pressure on this vehicle. Coming up on a few events in fairly rapid succession here. We'll see first stage main engine cutoff, or MECO, about T plus 2 minutes and 25 seconds. That'll be followed by stage separation, then the ignition of the Merlin vacuum engine.
AVAC chill started.
Which you just heard them. They're now thermally conditioning that Merlin vacuum engine, preparation for its ignition. The payload fairings will be deployed just before the 3-minute mark. There you see MECO. Stage separation. And ignition of that Merlin
MECO.
vacuum engine.
Stage separation confirmed. AVAC ignition.
You see those events happening on the SpaceX onboard cameras and hearing those callouts from SpaceX. Awaiting fairing jettison here. It happened in real time. Should see that on the SpaceX cameras now.
Fairing separation confirmed.
And those Starlink satellites now exposed to the vacuum of space for the first time on this mission. A good view of one of those fairing halves as it falls back to Earth. Again, it'll be splashing down in the waters of the Atlantic Ocean under the support of parachutes. A little more than 3.5 minutes into this flight.
Both stages are on nominal trajectories.
Good call. A predicted flight so far for this Falcon 9 rocket, both upper and lower stages. The next launch milestone here will be just about at the 6-minute mark when the first stage entry burn begins. Again, that burn will last about 24 seconds in total. T plus 4 minutes, 39 seconds and counting. Those periodic puffs that you're seeing in between the hypersonic grid fins and the Falcon 9's first stage, those are the cold gas thrusters used to adjust the vehicle's attitude or positioning as it begins to angle ahead of the entry burn beginning. Falcon 9 first stage, of course, also passing its apogee and beginning to make its way back down towards the drone ship just to read the instructions. Still picking up in speed at this point, but once that entry burn begins, now less than 30 seconds, you'll see that speedometer number plummet quite quickly. Now 6 minutes into flight. Should see the start of that entry burn beginning momentarily.
Stage 1, entry burn startup.
Stage 1 FTS has safed.
There you hear the call. Let's see the start of that entry burn. Again, this lasting about 24 seconds in total.
Stage 1, entry burn shutdown.
With the conclusion of the entry burn
Stage 1 trajectory nominal.
and a good call on a nominal trajectory,
Stage 2 FTS has safed.
we are now looking towards the start of the landing burn, which is coming up in less than a minute. Those calls you heard about the FTS being safed on the first and second stages, it's the flight termination system, a part of the safety profile for this and other rockets. No longer needed at this stage in flight.
Stage 1, transonic.
With the booster traveling below the speed of sound, assisted by both the initial entry burn, now by some atmospheric drag. We'll see the start of that landing burn here in less than 10 seconds.
Stage 1, landing burn.
Stage 2 terminal guidance.
Stage 1, landing leg deploy. Stage 1, landing confirmed.
And with that, for the third time, be 1085 safely down on the drone ship. SpaceX cutting off the feed there before we heard the call out for the nominal orbit insertion for the second stage. So we'll have to keep our eyes out for additional updates from SpaceX, but assuming that everything remains nominal with the upper stage of the Falcon 9 rocket, it will go into a coast phase till T plus 54 minutes. At that point, there will be a brief 2-second burn to circularize the orbit. And the Starlink satellites expected to be deployed at T plus 1 hour, 5 minutes, and 8 seconds after liftoff. And with a good landing of the first stage booster down on the drone ship, we're going to close things out with our mission stats as we normally do. But first, just want to take a quick peek back at the live chat, see if I've missed any additional messages or folks to thank, which I have. So want to extend our thanks to Denise C. for $2 super chat. Thank you, Denise. Marla Plunk, one of our wonderful channel members, with a $10 super chat. Thank you, Marla, who says, cheers from a former Floridian in Melbourne. Keep up the great work. Well, thank you, Marla. Mel Roberts Harold with a $2 super chat saying, just want to help in my own small increments. Well, appreciate the kind words, Mel, and being a channel member is certainly a big enduring help, and so we appreciate that. And you know, just being with us to watch these launches, the viewership itself, hitting the like button, being a subscriber, all go a long ways to helping us out here at Spaceflight Now. Also want to thank Third for a $5 super chat. With regard to Third's question in the super chat, it's a mylar material. It's part of the thermal insulation on the Falcon 9's upper stage. Also want to thank Beverly Knuckles for a very generous $20 super chat. Really appreciate that, Beverly. One of our channel members who says, made my day. Beautiful view of the Earth and the landings never get old. And finally, Kimberly with the $5 super chat. Appreciate you, Kimberly. Just offering a little support as we begin to close things out here. Speaking of closing things out, let's go ahead and check in with our mission stats as they currently stand. This was the third flight of Falcon 9 Booster 1085. This was the 390th Falcon 9 launch to date, the 105th so far of 2024. This was the 335th Falcon Booster reflight, or the launch of a booster that has flown at least once. This was SpaceX's 107th orbital launch of 2024, including 2 Falcon Heavy rockets. This is the 123rd orbital launch within the last 365 days. Concerning Pad 40, this is SpaceX's 214th orbital launch from this pad and the 269th overall orbital launch from Pad 40. Little typo on the date here. This launch slipped a couple of times. Of course, this is as of today, November 7th. SpaceX has 107 Falcon flights on the year. Moving on to some recovery stats. This was the 96th landing on the drone ship Just Read the Instructions, marking the 285th SpaceX drone ship landing and the 263rd overall SpaceX booster landing. Finally, with some industry stats, this was the 76th orbital launch from Florida this year, the 114th orbital launch from U.S. soil, the 125th orbital launch from a U.S. rocket company. Of course, you just saw Rocket Lab notch their 54th Electron rocket launch earlier this week, 54th to date. This was the 205th orbital launch attempt globally. There have been 6 launch failures on the air so far, and so here's where our pie chart stands. The U.S. still holding 61% of the pie, China with a quarter of it, Russia with its 12 launches holds 6% of the pie, Japan now launched 6 times on the year, India and Iran with 3 orbital launches apiece, the European Space Agency with 2, and North Korea with the lone launch attempt and launch failure. And with that, that's going to go ahead and close us out for today. But I want to thank a couple folks who threw in some super chats at the buzzer here. Certainly appreciate it. Don't want to leave them out in the lurch. So our thanks to Mark Joker Brown for a $10 super chat who says, congrats on another successful launch. Kudos to SpaceX there. And to Mel again saying, happy birthday to my daughter Molly. And I would be remiss if I let another live stream go without acknowledging a birthday close to the Spaceflight Now team here. So, Mr. Pete Carstens, if you're still listening, a belated happy birthday to you, sir. His birthday was actually yesterday. And with the scrub, it totally escaped my mind. Apologies for that. But appreciate all the work that you do for us, Pete. And hope you had a very happy birthday. Want to thank, of course, not only Pete with Max Q Productions, but our friends Chuck and Jen Briggs with C&J Images for helping to track the Falcon 9 rocket. Cloudy though it was, a little bit tricky today, but certainly appreciate all the effort. Also want to thank our Spaceflight Now photographer, Adam Bernstein, for tracking with us today, and look forward to the photos captured of the moment of liftoff. If you'd like to keep up with his photography or Michael Cain's as well, our other photographer, you can find them over on X. Michael's at MD Cain Jr., Adam at Aburn NYC, Spaceflight Now simply at Spaceflight Now. Also on Threads and Facebook. Want to thank our moderators who've been helping out in the live chat. Our thanks to Callistia Lee, to Aussie Space Girl, to Rusty Shackelford for hanging out with us today. Broad thanks to our other mods in general for when they are able to help us out. Big thanks to our channel member community who helps power what we do year-round here at Spaceflight Now, and looking to add some new capabilities in the near future as well to cover even more of Florida's Space Coast. I want to thank our Spaceflight Now editor, Stephen Young, for running the technical operations of the broadcast. Most importantly, though, want to thank you for wherever you're watching from here in Florida or elsewhere around the world. Don't forget, if you haven't had your fill of launches this week, there's another one coming up from Vandenberg Space Force Base on Friday night from California perspective. That launch looking to lift off at, I believe, 11:02, if my memory serves. Let me double check. Oh, it looks like SpaceX actually has made an adjustment here. Liftoff is 10:14 p.m. Pacific for the Friday night launch of Starlink 9-10. So I'll be back with you for live coverage of that mission then, and also look for the next Falcon 9 rocket from here in Florida to lift off with the Starlink 6-69 mission. That'll be another southeast trajectory mission. And for that, we are currently also looking at a November 9th, or actually, now it looks like that's going to be on the 10th. November 10th, which is coming up this Sunday afternoon. Got my calendar dates right? Yep. So Friday night into Saturday for here in Florida, or for the Vandenberg in California, and then back here in Florida, look for that on Sunday afternoon. And until we are with you again, my friends, remember, be good to yourselves, be good to others, and we will see you next time. And until then, bye-bye.